Sounds good.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to give everyone a minute or so to start filing in. I see those attendees ticking up right now. I hope everyone is having a great week. We've made it to Thursday. Those of us in Nashville are awaiting Taylor Swift this weekend and some rain, so it's going to be exciting. Thank you, Nina. All right, I'm going to give everyone a couple more minutes. Awesome, Libby. Nice. We are well represented. All right. So as we are getting settled, we have a prompt for you all to start thinking about. And if you are so inclined, we would love it if you share in the chat. So hearing this term sales readiness, I think this is a newer term starting to pick up some steam. And we would love to know from you all how you think about this and how you define sales readiness. And hopefully a lot of your thoughts will be topics that we all touch on today. And I'm going to have our wonderful panelists also define how they're thinking about sales readiness. We will also try to make it worth your while. So I have to say a huge thank you to our partner Sendoso for sponsoring our webinar. And there are fabulous gifts and prizes that you can earn and win through your participation. So you'll see them all on this screen here, but just to illustrate a little further, we have a very premium and beautiful yoga mat. We have the Beaker water bottle, which those are the it water bottle of the moment for sure. We have a lovely real house plant. I probably couldn't pick that one. I kill all my plants. And then last but not least, if you're in a celebratory mood, a bottle of Casamigos that you could personalize with some engraving. Yeah. So really fun. You will have the opportunity to choose from these prizes if you are selected. So back to the prompt while we're joining, and I'll pull up my chat in a second to see what we're hearing. But as you're typing where you're joining us from today, tell us in the chat, what is your definition of sales readiness and how are you thinking about it? Happy birthday, Mike. I see your chat.
Get that man some tequila.
I know, Mike, you may have an edge here. Steve, I love what you're saying in here. I agree with you. Ooh, Whitney, change management. I love this. Yep. Shannon, Nicole. Riley, thank you for the tip. Love this. Awesome. Nina, very much agree. Oh man, it's gonna be hard to choose some winners as we go along here. I'm gonna designate Steve as our first winner. So Steve, we'll contact you to pick your prize, but thank you for going first. That's awesome. All right, we'll drop some more prizes as we continue going on, but I'm seeing a lot of really great answers and things that I think the four of us will be touching on today. All right, so I will jump right into some introductions. I've started talking tequila. I haven't told you who I am yet. So my name is Kelly Berg. I'm the Vice President of Customers at Ambition. And our panel today are, three insanely qualified people to talk about sales readiness. And we all kind of represent different parts of the go-to-market function, which is really cool. So I sit on the CS account management side of the house. Spoiler, Andrew sits in the enablement world. We've got Katie in sales dev, Rayanne in sales. So you'll hear a lot of perspective that hopefully represents where you're coming from and how you're representing your org today. So as I mentioned, I'm based in Nashville, and I am going to pass the mic over to Andrew to introduce himself and Curious Lion and give us a preview of how he's thinking about sales readiness.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. And thanks everyone for joining us. This is going to be a lot of fun. So Andrew Barry, I'm the founder of a company called Curious Lion. We're in the business of helping sellers and everyone on a revenue team develop their potential, develop elite performance. And the way I look at sales readiness from the perspective of how do we enable it? How do we improve it at a client, at a company? And I think there's two aspects of it. Del Nakai, who's in the audience as well, and I collaborated on a revenue readiness scorecard where I'm not a salesperson. I don't have a background in sales. I come at this from a perspective of learning culture. So that's one piece of this for me. And I look at how do we create a sustainable system for learning so that that a revenue team can respond to whatever is happening in their market in the moment. And then the other piece of it that Dell brought to the collaboration we did was, the go-to-market expertise of what are the sort of pieces that you need to have, and that's including the measurement and metrics, tech stack, all the different components that I'm sure we'll talk a lot about today. So yeah, that's from my side. Oh, and I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. I live in New Jersey, and I'm in Detroit at the moment.
A man of many locations. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. All right. And next I will pass it to Katie Penner from Sendoso.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Penner. I am the head of sales development strategy and enablement at Sendoso, and I'm joining you live from Houston, Texas. To me, sales readiness is pretty simple, right? Have I properly prepared my reps to do their jobs well? Have I set proper goals, expectations? Have I enabled and trained them to effectively hit or exceed their goals and to walk into every sale or prospecting journey confidently? So with that, I am going to hand it off to the woman who gave me my first big break when I was an SDR at Sendoso, Ray Ann English.
Well, hello, I am Ray Ann English, as Katie so mentioned. I am tuning in currently from Boston. I am a sales manager at Klaviyo. I'm visiting our headquarters right now, but I actually live in Arizona. So tuning in from HQ. When I think about sales readiness, I think about confidence. I think about, do my reps feel fully empowered and confident to jump into the driver's seat? And are they well armed? Are they able to actually overcome the objections that are going to be thrown at them? Do they feel like they have enough in their tool belt to be successful? So preparation, confidence to do well is really what I think about when I think through sales readiness.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. And thank you everyone for the amazing chats in there. I think I need to save the transcript because there's so many great definitions and hearing a lot about the collaboration with other teams and confidence and the skills. It's really great. Okay, so before we jump into the roundtable, I'm going to take a page from the industry analyst and kind of talk about why this conversation matters. I think since you guys are all here today, I think it's pretty clear that this is a big topic right now. So looking at, the Forresters, the Gartners of the world, starting with this quote from Forrester. So sellers must go from being the members of the Army to highly trained special forces. I am sure all of us on this call have experienced the wonderful world of the current economic climate and just getting through the COVID pandemic. And so we're at a place now where you kind of can't just go dump a bunch of information on everybody and hope that something sticks. So we're talking today a lot about personalized sales coaching at scale, being a big key to sales readiness. So the hard part with that is the scale, certainly. So we'll hear from these three on how they're able to implement that programmatically. Another reason why this matters is Forrester is telling us there's an 82% performance variance between teams who actually focus on these types of readiness programs and skills and enablement versus teams who don't. So that's reason enough for me to say, okay, I need to make sure that my forces are armed and ready to be out in this world and closing revenue and really focused on the right behaviors that will help them win. Gartner also talked about some newer terms, newer concepts, and this idea of downsizing training. So instead of saying we're going to have a once a year sales kickoff and we're flying 600 reps in and we're going to blow it out of the water with this training, we need to think about downsizing it. And they use the term microlearning or these nudges. So when someone's actually just in the day-to-day and in the flow and maybe in their home office, they're not missing out on some of that ongoing enablement or the reiteration of the key things that you want your teams to be doing. At Ambition, we think about it a lot with the idea of coaching cadences. So coaching's building on, your program week over week, and you're kind of taking your reps on a journey there. So these are a lot of the things we're going to kind of dive into today as we talk about improving sales readiness and evolving how you're getting your reps ready to go, hit the phones, hit the field, and perform really well in their roles. Before we move forward too, I will say, please keep the chat up. I know that there's some great convo already going in here. I will try to keep one eye on this. And so if you have questions, you can absolutely ask during this. I think all of us would love for this to be a great conversation. So don't hesitate to use the chat as we move along. All right. So our first topic is going to be about onboarding. And I do think everboarding is becoming a more commonly used term. So onboarding becoming everboarding, and not just that 2-week course that someone gets where it's like, pick your health insurance and here's how you sell. All right, go for it. So I'm going to pass the mic again first to Andrew to talk a little bit about developing everboarding and reinforcing all the training and learning and readiness. So Andrew, tell me a little bit about your perspective, any mistakes you're seeing out there, things that people should keep an eye out for.
Yeah, so where do I begin? This is probably the most important thing I feel like we could talk about, because the biggest lesson I've learned in my own business, and this nearly tanked my business a couple of years ago. I came from a public accounting background. I worked at Big Four accounting. Everything there is pretty much done because of such vast scale. It's a multinational. It's all top down, right? And so this idea of onboarding, or kind of like, I love everboarding as a term, but I wish we didn't even have to call it any of this, because none of that is how we learn, right? We learn continuously. Like, it's never ending. Learning isn't a point in time event. It is a continuous ongoing process. And thank you, Del. That's pretty synchronous. Yeah, and it's a process. It's a process of learning from our peers, right? Of learning from experts that are both internal to our company and external. And sure, it exists as events, but that's just part of this ongoing process of learning. And that's where, I wish we didn't have to kind of label it as onboarding or everboarding and just think of it as it's learning. It's something that we're doing all the time. So that's kind of how I think about it. I'm excited to unpack today. Like, I think we probably all agree on that, right? And I think that's why we're here. To kind of really what does that look like in practice? Because to your point, Kelly, like the scale part is the tricky part. And how do we actually make this a reality in practice?
Yeah, Andrew, where do you see the learning being delivered from? Is it someone who's always in the company, so like an enablement leader? Is it the LinkedIn influencer who's dropping the great thought leadership? Is it an outside expert? Like, who do you think should be doing it? Yeah,
it should be all of the above. It's a constant, continuous process, and that's why we always think of it as a system. There's got to be a way to. There's always going to be some person that sort of kickstarts the process, and we with clients will create a lot of asynchronous content, and it has to be there, right? People have to be able to go on their own on-demand learning journey to basically. But what that does is just prime them to be able to have a common language to talk about that topic with everyone else, right? And that's where the real learning happens, because everything else up to that point is just that common language, and it's sort of memorization, etc. But and understanding maybe, but real deep learning comes from talking through these issues with each other in a way that's like, oh, I've got this deal coming up now. This is the problem I've had in all my deals up until now. What do I do here? And you're hearing it from someone else who's gone through the same thing as you. You're going to learn that way more effectively.
Right. Yeah, I love the idea of common language. And I see like Wendy in the chat is talking about it's trickling amongst the sellers. They're learning from each other. Steve, agree with you, calling out how hard that can be, or much harder remote. Rayanne, I know you've talked about the collaborative team part of this in addition to the one-on-one. Tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about that too.
Yeah, I think, it's really important for learning and development to obviously continue. And I think that to root into that, you really need to have a collaborative culture that incentivizes the team to want to learn from each other, because I've seen that as an issue as well. Certain types of territory structures or whatever it might be may actually have your reps hiding that gold from each other because, they don't want to lose out on an account or something of that nature. So making sure that you have a collaborative environment and you're incentivizing the team to learn from each other is super, super important. And further than that, I think as well, the landscape in sales is ever changing. It never stops. Your product is evolving, your competitors new competitors are popping up, competitors are evolving, recessions happen, COVID, whatever it is, what resonates with your potential customers or prospects can constantly be changing. So sharing what you're hearing, sharing what's resonating consistently and constantly is super, super important to that.
Yeah, great points. Katie, for you managing, sales development, oftentimes people who are earlier in career too, like how do you think about that common language, the evolution, things changing really fast and making sure everyone's kind of keeping up?
Yeah, so I'm kind of going to reiterate what Rayanne said, right? Like what works in sales development is consistently evolving. So our training needs to evolve with those times and to what is working in the moment. It's so important to be strategic about the trainings that you're providing to your teams and to make sure that they're really relevant and resonating.
Libby mentioned in the chat that it can be hard when people have such different selling styles or phone styles or personalities. And so kind of reiterating whether it's a talk track or something, how that can be hard, with those unique people in each role. So does anyone on the panel have a good tip for trying to figure that out as you're thinking about maybe your enterprise AE who needs a new talk track and the SDR also needs to learn it too?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is that people, we all have to learn how to learn, right? And like, I think you can look at that question and see, like, yes, we are all different. We all have different styles and personalities, and so therefore, it's really like figuring out how it's enabling someone to figure out how to pull out the parts that resonate for them. Because it's not like we're not saying when we create training and like, let's follow this AE's approach because it worked really well. We're not saying copy it exactly. We're saying like, pay attention to it, try and understand what they did, deconstruct it and pull out the parts that work for you, right? So I feel like it's missing, right? We don't even traditional schooling doesn't really teach you how to do that. It's just you get force fed this stuff instead of trying to find it yourself. So yeah, that would be how I look at it.
Yeah. We got another great question in the chat from Wendy about, are you asking reps and managers what their motivation is really? And I think part of this question could be about company values and how you're building that in of, do they actually want to help others? Is that like a skill or something they want to be known for? Or is their impact, they're really thinking about revenue and commission? What have you all experienced in that realm? And is that a question that you're asking your teams?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I think as a people leader, you have to understand the why behind every one of your reps' motivations. Like, what are they doing here? Especially in sales. Like, it's not something people just wake up one day and like, I'm going to do that for a career when I'm 10 or something. So really understanding their motivations, like I'll take it very specific. So I know we'll get to this a little bit later, but in one-on-ones, I'll set aside time to figure out like, what are your main goals this year, whether they be financial, like whether they be for your own personal health, what is it that you're striving towards? And how does that tie back to work? So if it's, hey, you know what, I'm really looking to save up enough for a down payment on my first home. Let's figure out exactly how we get you there and what what we need to do in order to make that happen. So really understanding the why behind what it is that they're here for is super, super important.
And that's so much more personal, and I think builds a really different perspective for you as their leader too, to know how important it is for that person and really helping them track that milestone beyond just quota, whatever, So I love that call out.
Yeah. And I mean, Rayanne did that for me, right? I mean, I think that this is a perfect example. I was one of Rayanne's SDRs when she was a director of sales development at Sendoso. And so during those one-on-ones, she would dig deep into what my professional and personal goals were, right? On the personal side, I was looking to further provide for my kids and my family. And in that professional side, I wanted growth. And so found this gap within our org, and she really helped push me to make that a reality. So, she doesn't just talk the talk. She definitely walks the walk there.
The real life case study here. Yes.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well,
Kelly,
it made it easy for me, I will say.
Kelly, can I go back to something Rayanne said earlier?
Yeah,
which I think
please.
is such an important point. I wanted to kind of follow up with you, Rayanne. Is you mentioned how almost like I think this is what you were saying, but basically like there's this like almost competitiveness within sales teams of hoarding knowledge and trying to like outperform through almost sabotaging the others on the team. And I think about that a lot, because that feels like a huge, obstacle to what we're trying to do here. Like what have you seen work in that, where you can kind of get people around that collective, like we're in this, we win together thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a strategic operational point, you have to make sure that you're not pitting them against each other. So if you have a like activity or open territory model, that can get really tricky because people are purposely like not wanting anybody else to take away from them. So I think that is, step one, make sure we are not pitting them against each other that way. And then from there, it's really just, how do we create that culture of togetherness? And I think a lot of that comes from forcing them to share, coming prepared to team syncs with agendas that open the floor and push them to participate. Awkwardly pause for a very long time until somebody starts to speak up if you have to. But once you can get them wanting to win together, and once they realize that that knowledge share is so beneficial to each other, it becomes so much more fun to be at work. It really just does, especially in the remote environment. You don't want to feel siloed. You want to feel like you can look at your team member and be like, yes, I have a question. I know you're really good at this. What do you think about my strategy today, and what can I change? And the learnings and developments and the highlighting of that is really, really important as well. So highlighting the winning together is huge. And it just kind of after that, the energy starts to feed off each other and replicate and just becomes the normal.
I think
that was a masterclass answer.
Yeah, I think that totally feeds into some of the questions we were getting on style too, because if you're not sitting next to someone, I remember that so vividly of, account management, CS, sitting next to someone and hearing how they described something or how they positioned a deal or handled an objection. And you're like, ooh, I like their style. I like how they did that. And if you're not next to everyone every day, being really intentional as the leader to say, let's build in that sharing, let's listen to a gong call of how someone did a really great job with that and try to pick up and blend those styles, I think that can be really powerful too.
Absolutely. And if you have, a few top performers and you have others who aren't necessarily there yet, figure out why they're top performers. What is it in their strategy that is leading them to be so successful? And how do we replicate it? Let's get them to share. Let's get them excited to share about how well they're doing, because that can be very, very pivotal. And small things make a big difference in sales process for sure.
Totally. We tiptoed into one of our next topics, which is about the effective one-on-one. And maybe we even expand this topic a little bit for the effective team meeting, but starting to think about going beyond just, okay, what did you do on this call? How many calls did you make this week? What's your pipeline looking like, et cetera? How are we making the one-on-one something that is more impactful, more personalized, maybe drawing information out of someone who isn't, as engaged, or maybe it wouldn't typically share as much in a one-on-one. So, and please use the chat if anyone has any questions here, because this has been great to get your feedback. But I'll start with Rayanne. How are you making those one-on-ones feel really, productive, meaningful, and personal?
Yeah, so this is what I'm passionate about. I cannot stand, and I think it is a huge mistake when managers treat one-on-ones as pipe crawls or call reviews. That should not be what the one-on-one entails. That should be a completely separate call, completely separate conversation. What you're looking to do in a one-on-one is develop your people, get to know them a little bit. I like to spend the first 5 to 10 minutes catching up on some of the things that we've talked about already: personal lives, goals, whys. Let's get to know each other a little bit from that perspective. It's also the place to have difficult conversations. If there is something going on that is, you have to criticize on a little bit, that's the place to do it. I also am a strong believer that agendas need to be set. We should not walk into the conversation and just be like, so how's it going? So many of my one-on-ones early on started that way, and it was just spinning circles, chatting it up for 20 minutes. And we need to have a very specific outcome that we want. So what I actually will do is I will send out some pre-prep work. I will often send out, like, for instance, when we start a new month or quarter, it will be our first one-on-one that week will be a reflection on last month. And it will have a few questions, and it will say things like, what would you have done differently? What are you super proud of? What did you learn? Stuff like that. And then we have talking points. We talk through them. We figure out what those gaps are, how we improve on what we want to improve on, and go from there. So making sure that we are getting something out of it, and learning and development is happening here.
For sure. I mean, I am very passionate about that. That's like what we do at Ambition, is helping prep that really effective one-on-one. So you're definitely speaking my language. Andrew, talk to me about when it has to be a difficult conversation. So maybe it is the performance isn't looking as great, or there is some harder feedback. How would you recommend engaging in that one-on-one?
Yeah. I didn't see this actually when we were prepping, but I love that you have whole person coaching on this slide, because for me, like, so much of this comes down to this. I'll answer your question, but I think we must first recognize that most managers get put into that role, right? They get promoted to that role because they were a top performer, not because they're good at managing people, right? So that's first and foremost. Like, people are just not equipped to do this. And what that means, what are they not equipped to do? What are we actually talking about here? It's about, you've got to, to really coach someone in a really impactful way. You've got to basically set aside your feels. You've got to sit in the other person's feels without losing yourself in those, to really understand what makes them tick, to then be able to say, well, basically just ask them questions, right? You're not trying to direct them or anything. You just want to ask them questions to help them get to the answer. You've also got to believe that they have the answer inside themselves, right? And that's it. It's essentially that. And then it's, knowing resources, etc., that you can point people towards. But we're not asking you to solve people's problems. That's the thing. They are there. They can solve them themselves. You've got to believe that, and you've got to believe that you're the one that can help them do that. And so, so the good thing is, I think this stuff can be trained, right? We're talking about empathy here. We're talking about asking good questions. We're talking about listening, repeating back to check understanding. All of these kind of things can be practiced and trained. And it's just, I think it's one of the biggest epidemics in organizations, that we don't do that enough for people who suddenly get told, no, you're responsible for these 3 people's careers. That's it's a big deal.
I mean, what a relief to the manager to hear you don't have to solve the problem for them. You need to be an active listener and really understand it and bring back the trends and help them get there themselves. That is huge. That's great advice. Yeah,
I cannot agree more with that. And what I used to call that is guiding them to that aha moment.
Yeah.
My reps will call me out on it. They'll be like, you're doing discovery on me right now, aren't you? Isn't that happening? I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what is happening here. And
I love
then all of a sudden it's like, aha, I have solved my own problem. I know the answer just by having this quick conversation. And really asking them the right questions and pointing them in the right direction of discovering that aha.
And it's validating for the rep, right? When they come to that conclusion on their own, right? It
Mhm.
is powerful to be able to do that. I think that that's probably one of the most important parts of being a true mentor, is being able to guide people to those answers.
Katie, you and
So
I also talked about translating it into action of like, okay, we got to a great place in this one-on-one. It feels like everybody knows what to do here. How do you actually help them take the next step to remember it and know what they need to go do?
Yeah, so I think walking away from every one-on-one with a clear plan of action for moving forward is really important, right? So in addition to whatever the rep needs to accomplish to hit their goals, I like to take personal accountability too, right? Like, what am I going to do moving forward as a leader to help them ensure success moving forward? How will this plan of action include both of us to help them achieve their whys, both personally and professionally? Right. And typically we have a Google Doc for one-on-ones where we keep track of these things so that we can hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
We also give our reps personal dashboards so that they're on top of, their activity. They can see all of that. It's very transparent.
Yep. The
well,
personalization is great too. I'm sorry, Andrew.
yeah. No, so I just realized that Katie's answer made me think of another thing, which I wanted to just basically underscore. It's such a small thing that you can do, but it's basically just follow up, holding people accountable. So you get them to commit to, you have that conversation with all the stuff that we talked about, but you get them to commit to an action at the end and then follow up a week later. It's such a small thing, but it's might be the biggest thing actually, because like you're actually getting them to do what they said they were going to do, and that, to Katie's point, like it's what they said they wanted to do, not what you told them to do, and you're just there to help them with accountability.
And you remembering, I mean, that shows that you're
Yeah.
invested. How many of us have said something to a leader at one point of, oh, I know I need to work on this, or I have a goal to do this, and you never hear about it ever again. And you're like, did they even hear me say that? So
Exactly.
yeah, closing the loop, that feels good for a rep for sure.
Yeah.
On this topic, Katie, I'm going to stick with you for another second here, because we're moving through this one-on-one territory into one of the next topics, which is the reinforcement of strategy. And so when you have those big enablement initiatives and those moments of, okay, we're organized and we're rolling this out, it can't just stop there. That obviously needs to be woven in through the one-on-one, through the team meeting, and have your frontline managers really empowered to do that and to bring it to day to day. So I know you've gone through this a lot, Katie. Talk to us about how you're doing that, how you take that strategy and ensure that it's top of mind for everyone.
Yeah, so time for me to drop some hot takes. Everyone get ready. I think we as managers and leaders can all agree, right, that we need some sort of minimum KPIs to work with our reps and figure out their strengths and weaknesses as they start with our company, right? A benchmark per se. However, here comes the hot take. I think that once you know that information, it's important to personalize those goals and KPIs to each individual rep, right? So an example of this, and I recently posted about this, but let's say rep A sets a meeting for every 4 call connects that they have, whereas rep B sets a meeting for every 8 call connects, right? It's important to, again, be open about that data, provide those personal dashboards so that they can access it at any time. And of course, again, harping on this, right? It's important to know those personal and professional whys and loop those back into the conversation. So the talk track for rep A could be something like, hey, you're really adding into that savings account you've been talking about, but what would it mean for you if you doubled that amount deposited per month? Right. Whereas on the flip side, for rep B, who maybe needs to do a little bit more to hit those goals. Hey, I know that your goal is to save whatever amount into your savings account this month. We are kind of missing that goal. The data shows that you are setting a meeting for every 8 call connects. So this week, let's push to X goal, right? Yeah. And so I think like genuinely, it all comes down to just really caring about your reps and showing that you care. In my experience as, a manager, genuinely caring about their goals has always directly correlated to the success that we've seen in our numbers.
Yeah. I like the helping them translate that too, of like, well, what does that actually mean, Rep B? It means like your activity needs to probably be higher if you want to hit that goal. But also there's an opportunity for me to do some extra coaching with you. Like, why are we not getting there? Let's talk to that rep. How are they getting so many more connects, or how are they seeing that result? Let's try some new things. So the data is absolutely huge.
Mhm.
Andrew, I know you're passionate about manager reinforcement. I think you even said it's the number one reason why training and enablement efforts fail. So tell me more. Tell me more.
Yeah, so in our business, we guarantee our work, right? So we'll go in and get really, I love the conversation in the chat about data, and that's where it all
Mhm.
starts. We can get really specific, personalized. We'll create programs and interventions and all the things we talked about. And you can do that. You can be world class at that. But if it's not being reinforced every single week by managers on the front line, it's pointless. It's a total waste. And so I think about this so much because it's in our guarantee, right? You have to, our clients have an SLA basically, and they have to commit to making sure that that's happening and monitoring it and checking it. So for me, it's the number one thing, to ensure the success of our work. And then I think there's also an interesting part about it. I love Katie's sort of very practical and tactical a way of running these things, and I'm going to definitely listen to the playback to go and get some of those notes out of that, because there's that way of information flow, but there's also information flow coming back the other way, which is feeding back, which should be fed back up to
Yeah.
senior leadership, right? And like everyone in the front line in the field are hearing what's happening in day to day, and is that messaging actually aligned? Is it hitting the mark with prospects, all that sort of stuff? And so it's also important to think about the information going back the other way and see that as a sort of two-way exchange.
100%. You mentioned briefly like the knowledge check or the checking for understanding. So I think that's like a big part too of, is this enablement strategy actually landing? As a rep too nervous to say, I don't actually get this, or I'm not sure of the why? Like, how do you recommend building in those knowledge checks?
Oh yeah, thanks for reminding me and calling that out. That's so key. So one of the pieces of our work is always designing reflection questions and prompts to go with any content. So content is completely pointless if it's just only consumed. It needs to be also reflected on. And what we recommend is get your managers can reinforce this, and you can do this as an enablement function as well, but just getting reps and everyone in the revenue team to write down a sentence or two about what that new piece of content or that new piece of training meant to them. Like, what am I going to do differently because of this? And then share that with your manager. And so now that's another thing your manager can hold you accountable for. And to your point, Kelly, it helps them check that, oh, you actually got this. Because like you might write something and you're like, oh, no, you totally missed the point. We need a dedicated.
Yeah, I was going to say, how interesting to read to see what everyone took away from that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, exactly.
Rayanne, I know you've mentioned keeping your reps accountable and setting those great expectations. Tell me a little bit about how you do that, or when there's that new initiative, you make sure everyone feels personally accountable to it.
Yeah, so I see a lot of data comments here, and I could not agree with that more. I think first and foremost, you need to generate buy-in from the team on that strategy. And in order to do that, you need them to understand the why behind it. And the best way to approach that is by showing them the data, making them understand the why as to what we're doing. And I think that's step one. Then on top of that, we all need to, once we've all agreed, we need to continuously hold them accountable. I think that very often, as we've mentioned earlier, managers or leaders will say, hey, do this, and maybe never follow up on it. Like constantly staying on top of it, constantly asking about it. So for instance, one thing that we recently did on my team was, okay, you know what, we're full cycle. So we outbound ourselves as well. And I'm like, it's showing that we, in order to get to where we need to be, need to set ourselves at least 3 meetings a week. Like, we have pipeline coming from other areas, but 3 meetings to start. Here's all the data that supports that. Then move on by tracking that on a dashboard, highlighting who's doing really, really well at it, calling out the people, spiffing the people randomly who are doing incredibly well. I would shout out Sendoso there, but we do not use them. We use Reach Desk, but Sendoso can be leveraged for that.
Yes.
But just really making a lot of noise about it and
Mhm.
showing the team that it's something that they should care about and it's something that you should care about, I think is really important there.
Yeah, the amplification can just be sort of baked into like reminder, like there are incentives for these things. We're going to give a lot of attention and accolade to the people who are really adopting it. That's a great call. Okay, we're going to jump into maybe it could be the hottest topic of them all. So performance improvement plans. I already know that some of us on this panel don't like the term PIP. And I think there's probably an epidemic of a PIP is just the last stop before somebody is gone.
Yeah.
Where it's not
Mhm.
necessarily used as an actual performance improvement plan of saying, hey, we want to retain this rep. We know that rep turnover can be a huge problem, and it costs a lot of money to be consistently investing in enablement and onboarding to only, lose a rep. So we want our reps to be effective. We want them to be ready. And the PIP's kind of happening because HR says, before you part ways with someone, you need something on paper. So it's not necessarily a tool to rehabilitate or to avoid turnover. It's just a last stop. So what we want to talk about is how to not do that, how to make performance improvement a topic that's something that is just ongoing. And it's part of sales readiness, is making sure that people who aren't understanding or aren't meeting expectations are given the tools to get there. So I'm going to start with Katie, because I know Katie has a story about a rep who was put on a performance improvement plan, but was able to absolutely change that trajectory. And so Katie was looking at the performance improvement as exactly that, as just a way to stop behavior that wasn't going well and to turn it around and see a great success story. So Katie, we'll kick it off with a positive story from you.
Yeah. So Nina, I see you in the chat. Totally agree that PIPs need a rebrand. But I had a rep who ended up on a PIP after 3 months of not hitting goals, right? And rather than viewing this as her first step out of that door, like you mentioned, Kelly, I took it as an opportunity to really narrow in on what parts of her process weren't working, right? If I didn't think that she was fit for the job, I wouldn't have hired her in the first place. So now it's my responsibility to get in the weeds with her, really dive into that data and figure out what are the issues here, right? And then from there, we set a plan for success. We gave her new scripts, new sequencing, did some one-on-one coaching sessions when it comes to some really hyper-targeted outreach. I also got her into one-on-one trainings with my top performing reps. And as a result, right, she graduated that PIP and actually ended up becoming a top performer. So, again, it's really important to use PIPs as an opportunity to narrow in on that coaching, to take responsibility as a leader, to provide that really intense coaching and do that deep dive into the data, and to stop viewing PIPs as a rep's first step out of the door.
Mm-hmm. I like the sort of accountability on that leader too. And then I also think back to like so many of these frontline managers were an AE 2 months ago, and they just have been hitting quota a lot. And so it was like, do you want to be a manager? Do you want to be a team lead? And now all of a sudden they're like, how am I going to help this person's performance improve? And so I like what you're saying about personalizing it, making it actionable, having your manager feel accountable to do that rather than just say, I don't think this is going to work out.
Yeah. And I think that that's the difference between a manager and a true leader, right? Is like taking
Yes.
that, doing that, those things, putting in that effort to really, and again, it all comes down to just caring about your people enough to do that back end work yourself and really understand what the problems are, because you should be equipped with the tools and all of that to figure out what the problems are and to solve for them. It just requires digging.
I completely agree. I think Nina mentioned the trust, and like it sounds like as you're building that culture of trust, and part of that is having those personal one-on-ones, understanding the motivation, that trust is going to help you. Nina, I totally agree. And then Mike, I love relabeling this as a coaching improvement plan. That sounds so much less scary for
I
both a
agree.
rep and a manager to administer. Thank you, Katie. Rayanne, I know you have mentioned sort of this idea of early intervention, like before you're even at the PIP stage, kind of figuring out what's going on. Tell me more about how you're even avoiding getting to that formality.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trending in that direction, we're going to know about it, right? So we
Mhm.
need to figure out why that is. What is it that's causing you to be underperforming and starting to trend in the direction of having to move towards a PIP? So individual, like very much what Katie said, individualized coaching plans, figuring out where the gaps are, understanding together what expectations to improve on, should be taking it personally as a leader. Like,
Yeah.
take it as a personal challenge. Like, I don't want you to go. Like, you don't
Mhm.
want to go. Like, wouldn't have brought you here if that were the case. So let's do everything in our power together to make sure that you do not end up getting there in the first place, because nothing hits the confidence for a rep like getting put on a PIP. It's so easy to go down that rabbit hole of like, well, guess this is it for me.
Yep.
It's the PIP now. So making sure that that's not the end all be all, and that you can really just focus on those gaps in development and learning.
I love
I
that.
love what you just said about taking it personally. Like, if
Mm.
your rep is going on a PIP, you should be upset. That should motivate you to really step up as a leader and figure that out with them. I love that.
Yeah.
I think it's so on point.
Andrew,
Extreme ownership.
yes. Andrew, tell me how you think about helping the sales manager know how to do this and know how to
Yeah.
do it with empathy.
Yeah. One thing that strikes me about these three incredible women that I'm doing this panel with is that you are all leading by example in what you do, and it's so clear in the way you ask this, answering the questions, and the way people in the chat are responding. And I think that's a very underrated, or not talked about enough. Maybe not underrated, but not talked about enough thing, is demonstrating this to people that are in need of performance improvement, really sharing how you as a leader are doing this yourself, right? Like, there is, going back to that thing, there's no end point here. There's no like, I'm done, I'm fully learned, or whatever. Like, it's, you're constantly improving. And so I think there's a lot that we can do as leaders to share. Like, I do this with my team all the time. Like, I'm first to admit when I don't know something, or messed up with something, and I'm very specific about what I'm doing about that. And it's amazing. Everyone responds so well to that, because they're like, oh, no, like, no one has it figured out. Like, everyone's like kind of learning all the time. So it's okay. Like, I can learn. And and then just doing away with the idea of PIPs. It's very much like, it seems like the death sentence. Like, you're on your way out. So it's HR's way of like making sure we do this correctly, type of thing. But yeah, so I think of it as like a learning pathway. And so showing I'm on a learning pathway as a leader. Let's figure out what your learning pathway is. Like, where's the part where can you really improve the most? And then let's figure out what that looks like. What should you do next? What are the actions you're going to take? The training you should take? Just really tailoring that to each person.
Yeah. When you all think about the timing, or making something actionable, time bound, how you want to see that growth and improvement, does anyone have a rule or a recommendation of what you think is reasonable? Or, and if you're starting early and intervening early, I think there's definitely more time. But how do you think about the time piece of this?
So just to make sure I understand the question, what you're saying is, how to put a time frame in for the expectations.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, you could use your one-on-ones as goalposts. You could use maybe quarterly goals, but how are you thinking about making sure that things are moving in the right trajectory quickly?
Yeah, I think, agreeing on what's reasonable for expectations is really, really important. They need to feel like they can do it. They need to feel like the goal is not in the stratosphere. They need to feel like those benchmarks are attainable. And that's very, very important for morale. So having that conversation, I often ask, like, do you think that, potentially increasing your pipeline generation by X amount over the next month is reasonable. And then I want to hear the whys. I want to hear the yes, the no, the why. And then I want us to agree on what we think is actually attainable based off of the development plan that we've put together. So, I mean, I think it very much so varies on what it is that we're looking to achieve. Yeah.
That mutual buy-in seems really important. And I mean, I've heard of PIPs before where it's like, well, you have to hit quota this quarter. And you're like, I have 3 weeks left in the quarter. Like, I don't think that's going to magically happen. So thank you so much. But yeah, I agree with that. Andrew, anything to add?
I was just thinking how important it is to have data, right? And it's almost as it also helps with the idea of timing. It's like, well, how long are we going to be able to, like, how long we have to wait until it shows up in the data? Right? Is it like a quarterly thing? Are we going to know in a month? Like, so I think that can help decide on that time frame. But yeah, it's got to have data. And it's like, this is where you are at. This is where the rest of the team is at. So it's possible. It's totally doable to get to, from a 6% to 12% conversion rate, and whichever metric we're looking. So let's figure out how to get you there. Like, and also, by the way, this person's at 15, and so let's go figure out what go have a one-on-one with them and figure out what they're doing. And yeah, it's so it all comes back to having that data to be able to make good decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think on the sales development side, it's right. Like, a lot of these things are immediately actionable. So if we sit down and we realize that maybe your call volume isn't where you need it to be, or, hey, you need to be writing more personalized emails, like, all of those are things that can happen that same day or the next day. I think what's important on the sales development side is really like just being obsessed about the data as a leader and going into that personal dashboard on a daily basis. If you're that, you should be that invested. If one of your reps is on a PIP, you should look at their dashboard daily, figure out how they're trending. If something is trending downwards despite the PIP, you need to call that out as soon as it's happening, right? We need to be there as effective coaches and really help guide them to success. So you have to be invested every step of the way.
Yeah, that communication during that period is absolutely key. Samantha chatted us to saying her team does IDPs, so individual development plans for everyone, which sort of normalizes that someone's, could be more like, keep doing what you're doing, double down on these things. And someone else's might be like, hey, we really need to see critical improvement in these areas. And I love that, because sometimes that news can get out. Someone tells their peers, I'm on a PIP, and it's doesn't help the culture. It becomes a fear thing. So I love that IDP. Okay, Libby's asking, how often should these check-ins happen when it comes to a plan like this? Andrew, I saw you said every week. Anyone disagree? Agree?
I think, again, it depends on the department, right? Like in sales, this may be a more long-term thing, whereas sales development, right, you may only have a chance to get out of a PIP for 1 month, right? So it kind of depends there. I like to be more hands-on with my reps. And if they're on a PIP, I'm probably meeting with them once every 2 days.
Yeah.
And, I think that could be seen as being, kind of, I forget the term for it, a micromanaging, right?
Yeah.
But I think what's so effective and what I've been able to do is really be invested in their personal and professional success, right?
Yeah.
Like, I actually care. So they're not, instead of them being annoyed by that or not wanting that attention and that guidance, it's welcomed, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes they're asking to meet on a daily basis so that I can help them. So I think it all comes down to, again, I'm going to just hammer this nail in as much as I can, caring about your reps so that they understand that you're coming from this place of, genuine support.
Yeah. Wendy and Nina are in the chat talking about how this is also a manager accountability thing, but also like that would be really interesting to know, especially at a larger organization, which of your managers are really effective at getting people through this, and who are the great coaches who are helping improve that actual performance and incentivizing that behavior in the leaders versus just saying act quick and move on. So I love that feedback. Yeah, Steve, situational leadership. Absolutely. Okay. We're coming in hot on timing. We've been having this great Q&A in the chat, so thank you all for that. We have a few more minutes left. If there are any burning questions or anything for my panelists, Katie, Rayanne, yes, Andrew, do you want to add anything? Was that?
Yeah, no, sorry. I was actually just saying I need this room for 2 more minutes. So.
Love it.
I'll wait my time.
Any other questions from our wonderful audience?
This audience has been amazing.
I
This
know.
chat is on fire.
And okay, so I get to give out a few more prizes. It's really hard to tell who was most active, but we have Mike, very active, and it's his birthday. Mike, we'll go, Sendoso will gift you a prize. We'll follow up, and then I'm going to go Nina, and I'm going to go Wendy. We'll follow up with you to choose one of your fabulous prizes here. Yes, yay you! Go Wendy, go Nina, go Steve, go everyone who got some prizes. And you can fill out a 1-minute survey right after to be entered to win one of these too. So thank you all so much for the awesome chats and questions. And thank you to Sendoso, because these are really great prizes. So, all right. Anybody else have anything? Thank you, Steve. My panelists were fabulous. Thank you for all of the insights. I feel like I probably could have talked about this for 3 hours, but we had one. So we did a great job with that 60 minutes of time. All right. A follow-up webinar. Yes. Thanks, Dana.
Kelly, can I just say as well, I mentioned this at the top of the call, but we put together a revenue readiness scorecard. Del Nakai and I collaborated on it together. I want to just pop it in the chat for anyone. The goal with this, and so many of you get this, like everyone here got it. The goal with this is what I really want this tool to be is something that people can take to have an informed conversation with their leadership teams, because there are 14 things that we measure there, and it allows you to kind of prioritize those and say, hey, these are the top 3 things we have to work on, and it tries to encompass this whole conversation here. So it's a beta launch. We haven't even announced it yet, but I put the link in the chat there, and if anybody has any feedback, would love to hear it. Hopefully it's useful.
That's awesome. Thank you, Andrew. And yes, I know all of us would welcome a LinkedIn Connect, so feel free. And if you have any other questions or want to keep the convo going, I think all 4 of us are open to that. So don't be a stranger. And thank you all so much for attending today. This was a great conversation. We'll send out the recording tomorrow, so you will have access if you want to go back and get some of these actionable tips. And Katie, Rayanne, Andrew, thank you all so much for the time.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
for having us.
Take care.
Everyone.